There were a couple of areas that as we went through that they felt like there are times when we feel like our younger kids or littler kids aren't necessarily connecting with the material that's coming through in the story. Sometimes the older kids may get it, but the younger kids, it's kind of flying a little too high at times over their heads. So that was one of the things, and just the whole idea that goes with that of engagement. Sometimes it's hard to engage them, and it's not always happening. The kids are engaged. So those were kind of a couple of the main things that the parents were thinking of when they and shared with us when they took this survey. It was really engagement, being able to really connect with those kids and to tell that story in a way that really connects with the majority of them. And there'll be a lot more said about that and how to do that, but those were kind of the couple of the big things that came out of that survey that we wanted to kind of talk through and think through together on ways to deal with that. And so one of the people that I've had a lot of conversations with about this is Doris. And Doris, of course, comes from school background, as Robin does, and teaches kids currently. And said she had some things put together that would hopefully help in some of these areas, and I was gung-ho for it. So I want to thank Doris for being here and taking the time to do this and putting some time and energy and effort into just helping all of us continue to do what we do even better. And that's really why we're here. Because we feel the kids are extremely important and we want to continue to meet their needs. Thanks, Doris.
And obviously it was important to Jesus. And so if for no other reason, you know, our example of what Jesus thought of the little ones and the fact that Jesus taught through the little ones. And so our goal is to engage the children who come forward, providing a worship experience at their level, while at the same time adding to the total worship experience of the congregation. The thought here is that at that point in the service, the children do come first. And if the adults aren't engaged, that's okay. On the other hand, we'd like to do this in a way that it is not a distraction from worship as a whole. To find that fine line of having children be engaged, but to still have it be fitting, appropriate to a worship service. One of the things we talked about the other night with the group that was here, we have traditionally, or at least for the last period of time, mostly had 4 to 7-year-olds coming forward. And one of the conversations I had with Dr. Tom the other night was, is this because our Kingdom kids really feel they are too old for children's story, or for some reason have they felt left out and aren't feeling comfortable for some reason? So it was honestly the single prayer I prayed the most before this morning was, help me to figure that out. I gently invited it this morning, but what was amazing, and it may have been because we had this family with so many new kids, I had this morning the best balance of age of kids that made actually telling the story easier that I've seen up there in a long, long time. However, even so, we need to remember to plan low. The older ones will come down and get it. There wasn't a kid up there who didn't think M&Ms were cool. Okay? Plan low, talk low. The older ones will still get it. The when isn't horribly significant, except that it really is the last opportunity, the way our service is currently structured, for little people to be moving, engaged, doing anything. They go back to their seats from this, and we're into the prayer set, and from there we're into the sermon. And so, again, this is where the parents' responses are coming in, that please, please help engage our children, make this something, it actually helps them through the rest of the worship service when they come back to their seats, excited about the piece, feeling like something was just done for them. Couple of little structures we kind of like to put in place. One is, it has not been consistent that whoever tells children's story has been meeting back in the prayer room with the other participants. We'd like to see that happen. I put that into this PowerPoint, realizing I've never done that until this morning myself. It's beneficial for several reasons. One is the opportunity to pray together, which is huge. But the other one is that there are things that just happen on the last minute, that as much as John, Elaine, Brian, and everybody tries to have a Sabbath morning service ready to go in a certain order, there are just times things happen on the last minute. And that is the last opportunity to have those conversations. And if you're there, then to also help improve the flow of the service, to ask that person that as the praise team comes out and comes up onto the platform, that whoever's telling the children's story comes in and stays on that front pew. We've had a couple situations where the person telling children's story was way back on the pews sitting under the window, and sometimes you've then got children up front before the storyteller gets there. We are going to try really hard to designate the orange microphone for this purpose and have it on the front pew. However, we ran out of microphones this morning, John. We totally, completely ran out of microphones. Kathy was on a corded mic. Yeah. Yeah, and I went to Dave and told him that I would get the orange mic so that he would know which one I had. Until we can get a designated children's story mic, I would say check in with me or go check in with AV yourself. And then, that's the other nice reason to go meet in the back room, is once you figured out what mic you're gonna use, figure out which singer has it. So I had decided I was still going to use the orange mic. By meeting with them in the back room, I was able to say, who's using the orange mic? Jackie raised her hand, said, I am. I said, when you come down off that platform, would you put your mic in my hand? Then AV's not having to go, what mic is she using? And that mic's ready to go faster.
I tend to use the clip-on because I use my hands or I
Yeah.
have things I need to hold. Is that a problem or is that just?
No.
No?
Most people hate it.
Okay.
Most people hate that mic. And this morning, they would have given me the other option is the other actual headset. Peggy used it this morning. Okay? Yes, there are 3 types of mics. There's the headset, like John uses and Brian uses. There's the lapel mic, and there's the handheld. And those of you that are comfortable going to AV and working it out with them, go for it. But if you've got a question, please ask. It's one stress you shouldn't have to deal with. It's time for children's story, and there's no microphone in the microphone stand, and where did the singers all just take their microphones to? We need to eliminate that from being something you have to think about, and we've even discussed. It may mean we need to buy another couple microphones. And if that's what it is, it is. But some of these things we're thinking will help. Then, if you're there, and that microphone is in your hand, almost the minute your name is out of the mouth of the person introducing you, turn around, face the congregation, which also means you're facing the AV booth, and start talking. This accomplishes several things. The children are now coming to you, you're greeting them, there's your first piece of engagement. You're also saying things that if they don't get picked up on the microphone, aren't super important, so if it takes a minute for AV to get that mic adjusted for you, it's not that the first words you say into the mic are your story. It also really, really is a great, I was gonna say preventer of discipline problems, I'm now thinking of a positive way, encourager of positive behavior. Boys and girls, come have a seat over here. For me this morning, the ability during that time to say to them, there's these pictures I want to show you. You'll be able to see them better. I'm going to sit here on this chair. It sounds like meaningless drivel, but it's really not. It's actually accomplished several things. By the time the last child is sat down, all that stuff's taken care of. And it's really easy to go. I look at Sean because I know where he made comments the other night, and I mean, just several things you can say. The encouraging them of where to sit, greet as many as possible, complimenting appropriate behavior. Okay. If the pianist doesn't seem, sometimes the pianists are really, really tuned in, and it's one of the things I need to talk to the pianist about. But sometimes the pianists aren't really, really tuned in, and you need to realize whoever's playing the piano or keyboard is usually flying blind. They cannot see back there what's going on down front. So if you have to at that point say, so boys and girls, are you ready to begin our story? You know, if that's what it takes to get that piece. Because I've been the person on that side on the keyboard. And I've stopped playing, and nothing happened because they were still setting up down there. So, if we can help make that transition clear.
Very good.
All right, 5 minutes. I know we want to teach children lessons. But children don't think lesson. They think story. They think relatable characters. And so, the question I've had asked to me before is, so what do I do if what I have is I want to teach a lesson? I really have a burden this week because of some experience I've had that I want to teach kids a lesson about being honest. What do you do? Tell a story. What story?
Time you weren't.
Tell a story. And if you have to make up a story, yeah.
I'm storybookers.
Yes, yes. I mean, most any of these things that are principles that we as adults know, you can work it backwards to a couple of children and you can create a scenario or take one that you have and adjust it. This is, you know, unless you're telling a story straight out of the Bible, there's nothing that says these have to be factually accurate. They can be historical fiction. Okay? Because if you can get them with the narrative, they'll remember the lesson. You know, I sat here Wednesday night and I looked at the people who were sitting here, and my ending question to them was, so what if I decide that I just have this real burden, that this coming Sabbath I want to teach Martin Luther King to a group of 4-year-olds? And I'll tell you guys, the looks that I got from the adults sitting here was basically, I wouldn't do it, you're crazy. It can be done. It's possible. The introduction. Think about where you're going to end. And unless it's going to lead you to where you're going to end, skip it. We've had a couple of stories that the meat of the stories were fine, but we spent the first whole 5 minutes with somebody telling us exactly geographically where in the United States this took place. I mean, if it's in a foreign country, maybe you want to tell them it was in a foreign country, but they're not going to understand that anyway. But to explain how many years ago it was in a foreign country, why you were on the specific road that you were on with the specific person that was in the car with you, when the point of your story is that God sent somebody to help you when you got a flat tire, probably the only piece of background there I need is that there was nobody in the car with you who was able to change a tire. That's really probably the only piece of the background I need. All the rest of that, let it go. If you spend 3 or 4 minutes doing that and they don't know why, you will have a really hard time getting them back. Plus you just used an awful lot of your minutes. And then what I've seen happen is stories either get really, really long, or people then feel like they've got to rush through the important part of what Jesus actually did. So, again, backwards plan. I usually write my children's stories. I usually write them a couple days ahead of time, pretty much verbatim as I would say them. Seldom use a piece of paper once I'm up there. But if I sit down on Friday night and write it out, I get up Sabbath morning, read it back through and ask myself, can I do it in 5 minutes? And what is there in here I don't need to stay? And start crossing stuff out. It seemed important to me when I first wrote it on the computer and I was just telling the story to myself. But do I really want to say that to a bunch of little kids tomorrow morning? Plus, just for me, the act of typing and the act of scribbling on it is what puts it in my head anyway. The setting of the story. This is your grabber. And I didn't use this word the other night. I sat in a teacher training Thursday, and we talked about the hook. I'm sure Miss Robin has heard that phrase in a couple of curriculum trainings. You need a hook. The hook to pull them in with. And as a matter of fact, if you want to give an introduction, I'd still do the hook first. I do the hook first and pull them in. This morning, simply looking at pictures of a family, of kids, with me telling them very little about those pictures, kids immediately relate to pictures of other kids. They wanted to see the pictures. Well, if I'm holding the pictures in my hands and they want to see the pictures.
Let's pull them in.
Now you want me to tell you about this picture? Now I've got my hook. Couple of clues here just in the telling of stories. One of the challenges for me telling stories here to 4 to 7-year-olds, and it's funny, and Miss Robin will get this. Robin, you and I both know the difference in language development between 4-year-olds and 12-year-olds. And the difference in the length of sentence structure that even a 6-year-old produces and a 12-year-old produces. Well, they understand at about that same level. So if I am talking to 6-year-olds, I really need to talk in 6-year-old sentences. Now that doesn't mean I totally dumb it down, but a 6th grade sentence should have 10 to 12 words in it. That's what I'm told academically appropriate language for my 6th graders is. An academically appropriate sentence for a 1st grader is 5 to 6 words. So one of the clues that I came up with is, lose the word and, make it 2 sentences. We tend to tell 2 ideas. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. No, this happened. And guess what? Then this happened. Also gives you some opportunities there for some voice inflection that you don't get when you have one runaway train, but just those pauses. This morning, I tried really hard to make them between the 3 different pictures. Also, good time in here for key questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about asking questions, but the main thing here is plan your questions ahead of time. Think about what you're going to ask. I wouldn't have asked the question about why we're not going to school on Monday if I had not gotten that older group of students who came forward. I had planned not to ask that question when I thought I was gonna get 4 7-year-olds, when all of a sudden I got that whole group of 9, 10, 11-year-olds this morning. It made sense to ask that question. They were then able to contribute and relate. But the other thing is, if we're going to ask questions to children, we need to validate their answers. If the question is important enough for me to ask, then I need to be generous enough that when they answer me, I respond with a thank you, that's right, a redirection if it's wrong, which is where I say, if you're not comfortable with whatever you're gonna get, then don't ask questions. We've had some questions go upside down. One of the things Pastor John brought up Wednesday night was the idea of questions that don't require a verbal answer. For example, if you're going to talk about pets, not even saying how many of you have a pet, because even when you say how many of you have a pet, you will get somebody who say, I have a dog, I have a cat, I have a lizard, my hamster died last week. You know. And some storytellers handle that better than others, but you'll get that. But if you said to them and gave them a specific behavior, boys and girls, raise your hand if you have a pet at home. Wow, I see lots of boys and girls who have pets. I'm going to tell you about my pet. You've now engaged them. You've now given them an opportunity to respond without setting yourself up for, I used to have a hamster, but. You got the, I used to have a hamster, but you say, I'm sorry, you move on. So, this kind of goes along with the questions. Don't ask unless you want an answer and are prepared for any answer. Ask questions that the majority of the children can answer. Or, if we're going to get the spread of kids like we did this morning, vary the questions. If the question can only be answered by 1 or 2 older children, then we're missing the rest of our audience. That one came from a children's story we had at one point about bats. And the question that the storyteller asked required the children to generate the word echolocation. Most of our children aren't going to be able to answer echolocation.
Probably some of our adults can't either, but.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and what happened interestingly in that story, there was one child who could, who yelled out echolocation, and what proceeded from there was a dialogue between the storyteller and that one child on echolocation. Okay? The last one on here is one of the hardest ones, which is to self-monitor as you talk, which means you've got to hear yourself. Received. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Have I lost their attention? Do I need to change what I was going to say into a question? Or am I getting really weird answers to questions today? I better take all of my questions and turn them into statements because the last 3 questions I asked didn't give me what I wanted them to give me. And people, that's just experience. And for me, it's one of the hardest things here because But I'm doing it with my own classroom. We're together every day, and so I get crazy answers. We all go, really? And we're all one age group and we figure it out together. I'd rather not do that in the front of the church. But let me just go back there and say that's another reason for the slowing it down and the pauses between the sentences. It's making it relatable to them, and that's giving you a pause that really, it's gonna bother you more than anybody else, but it's gonna give you a chance to go, okay, I need to go a different way with this. Visuals. One of the things I've observed, and you heard me say it to the kids this morning, is that some of us as adults have done them a disfavor. We're asking them to face a storyteller. And then we're sticking things on a PowerPoint that are over their head, or asking them to see the PowerPoint clear on the other end of the church. Well, unless the PowerPoint is one single object, like Rosie Paulett has been known to bring a picture of Windsor, the kids can't see it on the PowerPoint in the back of the church, on the screen in the back of the church. Which means you're now asking 4-year-olds to look at you, look at the picture, look at you, look at the picture. So that was my experiment this morning, is what happens if I just take the same pictures that are on the PowerPoint, blow them up to poster size, and I sit on the floor and I pull the kids in close to me and say, guess what, guys? You can ignore those up there. Those are just for the big people, like they can look at them. And I have to tell you, it was palpable, the children pulling in. I was prepared to get up out of my chair and carry the picture around. That's actually what I expected to need to do. I didn't. They made themselves see the pictures. But even PowerPoint slides aside, an object in your hand is much more relatable. One of the comments that a parent made in the survey was, Miss Robin with her puppets could keep our children's attention all week. That was an actual response in there. I think of another story that was told not too long ago that had both the word parent and the word parrot in it. And it was funny to the adults, the confusion between those two words. But the kids weren't getting it. But what if that individual had had a puppet of a parrot or a stuffed parrot in their hand, so that every time the parrot talked,
It made more sense.
yeah, would have made all the difference in the world if we'd had that. And I'm gonna guarantee you that every single child would have watched. And even, you know, and I'm gonna do it again, Sean, Nat and Kinder's little girl did this blank Wednesday night.
Kinsey.
Kinsey. Kinsey is into watching objects. Even though she's not into the stories at all, she's into watching objects. When I had my teddy bear a couple of weeks
That
ago.
was so cute, the teddy bear. That was like the best story.
Well, that's what you said about Martin Luther King. I'll just keep you around. No, you know,
So cute.
just any object like that is going to engage the really littlest ones who we're simply trying to teach that children's story is for them and it's fun. And at this point, Kinsey, that's all she's gonna get, is that that's a special time that Daddy picks her up and carries her up front and she gets to sit up front and something fun happens. And that's all Kinsey's getting at this moment. But you know what? That's important, that we're training our babies, that that's cool, that that's for them. And so that's why, you know, an object. The conclusion. Don't rush to the lesson. They won't get it unless the conclusion is strong. Of all the times in your story to keep your sentence short, that's it. And make it real explicit. So this is what I want you to remember. So this is what Billy learned. This is what I hope you will do this next week. Give them a leader into that sentence, and then say it again, especially where you have the older ones like I did today, have them repeat it, have them say it with you. And one of the other things, these last 4 bullets here actually came to me from the parent surveys. Interestingly, several of them commented, you know, we appreciate that you're trying to teach our children important things, but especially for our little ones. If you did, one parent said quite eloquently, if you did nothing but tell my child every single week that Jesus loves them oodles and oodles and oodles, I'd be happy. And so I got to thinking, you know, especially with our little ones, if they're reminded that Jesus loves them, that he hears their prayers, that he wants us to love others the way Jesus loves us, and that God can use kids. I'm not saying there's nothing else of value, but so many other things, being honest, being kind, being helpful, things we need. Yes, they have a lesson, but can we take that lesson and pare it down into real simple, kid-friendly language? Behavior management. Yes, Robin?
It's kind of hard when you've got some little ones that are active and they like to run all over the podium. That's why I'm always grateful when we have adults that also come up. And maybe it might be helpful if the storytellers, well, those who are lining up the storytellers might actually call on a couple or one, or assign 1 or 2 people every Sabbath to just sit there and help with the management. In case, you know, we know that there are some children who just like to run. And not that they're not engaged in the story, they just like to run and they feel safe. And you want children to feel safe. But sometimes it helps if there are other people there to help corral.
And it isn't ideal for the children's story person to be the one doing
No,
it. That's
too hard.
It's hard for you
juggle.
to do it, and it's asking you to split. Your role at that moment should be a positive one, and you're trying like everything to make your role be a totally positive one, to be engaging to all children. And the minute you turn around and reprimand one, that's just changed how you're perceived by all of them. One of the things, we do have a couple of parents who are starting more to come up, and one of the things John and I have talked about is now that we're going to be doing our part for children's story, to ask some parents to become more involved that way. But until and when, yes, I am putting together a group of some people besides myself who are willing to come and to sit up there, because I think we just need
Help.
some help, yes. And one of the reasons we did move children's story to the side of the church that we did, there's more room where they can't climb over a monitor
Or flowers.
or flowers, but it's also closer to that outdoor,
Yeah.
yes.
That's really smart.
Uh-huh,
And they're not crawling under the piano or can get squashed by other objects.
and playing the mic with the microphone that's under the piano and disconnecting it, and yeah. And so it's almost like now if we get a person who sits between the flowers and the children,
Mhm.
Right.
it keeps it all going that way.
Right.
And I keep pulling the little Joash church closer and closer
Mhm.
that way every Sabbath. Because again, if the kids have to come all the way over there to put their dollars in it, they're more likely to sit. And I would say to you, don't be afraid if that little church is too close to the flowers when you get up there, because I've missed it. You just drag that little church over towards the door a little ways, and boys and girls, the church is over here. Yeah. On the other hand, when all else fails, don't be afraid, and you're at a little disadvantage using the lapel. You have to cover it. But to lower your mic and ask a child for a specific behavior. Okay, a couple other quick things. Asking children to read a text. Doesn't engage most of our children. Most of our children aren't of an age to read directly out of a Bible. But if you want a Bible text, ask an older child. You know, when I wrote this, I was thinking of some of those kids who haven't been coming forward. Ask them ahead of time, and ideally type it for them on a card in a large enough font. Most of our kids aren't of an age to be able to read the small font of a Bible. If you like the idea of them holding a Bible, lay that card on a Bible. And also be thoughtful of what version of the Bible you use so that it does make sense and flow like their natural speech pattern. They'll read it much better. Ending with prayer, and I'll just say here this is a Dorisism more than it's a rule. There are some of our storytellers who just feel very strongly that they want to pray with the children. And I won't ever tell you then that you can't. That's not my call to make. I'll just give you my observations. My observations of that is that a number of times people have said, so boys and girls, before you go back to your seats, I'd like to pray with you. Let's pray, dear Jesus. We have some children who maybe are not, for whatever reason, being taught at home or in the sanctuary exactly what that should look like, sound like, and feel like. So if we're going to do it there, both for their sake, the sake of the children who don't know, the sake of the children who do know, who are trying to do it appropriately in the midst of all this, and the sake of a congregation that is at worship, let's take the time to tell them what that's going to look like. Boys and girls, I'd like to pray with you. And I see everybody fold their hands. Let's bow our heads. Let's close our eyes. And once again, please, please do not ask a child to spontaneously pray. John, I don't know how many adults would ever get up in this church and pray the morning pastoral prayer spontaneously.
It's 2 hours of preparation.
See, and I knew you'd said that. Exactly. So why in the world would we shove a mic in the face of a small child and say, pray?
Forceful.
You know, it just isn't, to me, good principle. Please don't raise your hand. Please just talk. I make me feel like a teacher.
What was I gonna say? Like some I've seen storytellers, like they give would anyone like to pray? Now, like there's been times where it ended really well, like it was a very cute prayer or whatever. But I don't know, like I think like asking, oh, does anyone want to pray? If not, you just end it yourself. But I think like you're taking a risk like asking a question like that. Like
You are even then, and you better be prepared to handle it.
Yeah, like you have to be like ready for whatever, like, you know, or say like a little, like an older kid says, oh yes, I would like to pray, and you trust them that they're not gonna say something like that's off topic or something. I don't know, you just have to plan it well.
Well, and what came up Wednesday night, Sonia, was the way we prayed with kids at Panama. Every single prayer got prayed 3 times. I had asked Manuel to just pray in Spanish and have the kids repeat after him, but he wanted it to come from me. So I prayed in English, Manuel repeated the sentence in Spanish, and the kids repeated after that.
Yeah.
There's no reason you couldn't do a repeated prayer with the children here. Dear Jesus. There's
Just
no
so they
reason.
don't feel so much like, oh.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I think, doing that kind of thing gives us an opportunity to truly teach praying to children.
That's called modeling.
He's a teacher. It's called modeling.
Works with the youth as well.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Youth are just big 4-year-olds. Handing things out. We had a long conversation Wednesday night about the consistency or inconsistency in handing things out. I think John's looking into, is there something that the church might supply on a regular basis? There was some suggestion for that. But in the meantime, we had a couple of weeks ago, someone who had things to hand out, tossed them on the front pew and went to their pew and sat down, said to the boys and girls, and so as you go back to your seats, here's some handouts for you, tossed them on the front pew and went and sat down. Please don't. If we had the group we did this morning, it would have taken 2 or 3 people to have gotten things handed out in timely fashion. And that's the kind of thing, you can just grab a couple of youth on Sabbath morning as you're getting up, saying, come up and sit on the front pew and be ready to help me hand things out. When all else fails, remember why you're there and who your audience is. If you find yourself turning around to the congregation to make a point or to respond to them, you've probably lost your intended audience. I have to tell you, when I told my story with the teddy bear a couple weeks ago, it bothered me the whole time. And I'm probably the shortest storyteller in the midst, and I still felt like the Jolly Green Giant holding my teddy bear up here over these little people down there. For me, this morning, sitting in that chair, face to face with them, made all the difference in my engaging with them. But the other thing was, I totally forgot about the rest of you.
Because you got to their level.
Just physically pulling myself in there, I didn't feel the rest of you out there at all. Just hard for me. Yeah, I'm an expert at talking to kids. I hate doing it in front of adults. It's hard for me to ignore you. This morning, you weren't there.
And honestly, that's probably one of the most important things. If all else fails, just keep talking to the kids. That's huge. And that's something that I have noticed over the years, that it's very easy to tell the story because the adults will respond with a lot of laughter and humor. It's easy to begin telling the story to the adults. And this is really an opportunity to just give those kids a little bit of something they can really relate to. So, yeah, at the end of the day, if we just took one thing away, this would be a huge one. Just keep looking at the kids. The adults will get it, no matter whether you look at them or not. But the kids will, they'll check out fairly quickly if that engagement doesn't happen. And I'll also mention, I'm quite a bit taller than you are, Doris. And we're all the size God wanted us to be, but I find that it's very difficult for me if I'm standing up to try and talk to the kids. Because I feel even more than you do, that Jolly Green Giant experience.
Well,
And so I find myself having to either get down on my knees or bend way over and try to get
Yeah.
on that level with them.
let me tell you, there's a picture I almost put in this PowerPoint to make the point. The picture of you in Panama.
Hmm.
Do you know what picture I'm talking about? The picture of you playing marbles.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
When did you have the best relationship with a little kid in Panama? There is a darling picture of John down on all fours in the dirt with this little kid teaching him how to play marbles. And John standing up never would have had that experience that you had with that little kid.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I remember that.
It's funny, in Panama, I think the most I've ever had, like, not had to bend down, but like, literally like kneel down, because, you know, all these kids, like, I think it was after some activity, like, oh, let's take a group photo.
Yeah.
And then all the kids like, oh, I want to take a picture of you with her, or like, I want you to take a picture of me. And like, there's like fighting over this camera, like, okay, let's take turns. And like, you know, I was taking some standing photos with them. Well, I was looking at these photos, like, there was a big height difference. And I was like, oh, I should just like kneel down. Because then they feel like more at your level, and it made a big difference. Like, or even just like talking to them, like, oh, like this is how you use the camera, or it's just like the engagement, like get on their level, because then they don't feel like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it definitely made a difference, just kneeling down or something, or sitting.
That's very, very good point. I have a couple of quick questions.
Okay.
Based on some things that I think came up on a Wednesday.
Okay.
So let me jump back to those really quick, and then we'll open the floor up for other questions or observations that you have. Let me find this first one. Okay, one of the questions was in the introduction of a story, and if you do, are there some things that would be really helpful to know about introduction and questions?
Well, the scary, and almost more important to me, useless thing about asking a question in an introduction, unless your question is strictly rapport building, the kids have no idea where you're going. And so their ability to take a while, kids want to please. And so they hear this question thrown out there, and they are going to answer anything because they just want to please. You know, it kind of goes to the example I gave, which I wouldn't have asked the question this morning in my introduction about why there's no school on Monday until I hadn't seen those right kids come up there. I would have gone to telling and made that a little telling piece and wouldn't have asked it as a question. I felt pretty safe. And if you actually replay it, I didn't start it as a question. I started it as a statement, watched the faces of about 4 boys, watched them nod, went, okay, they're with me, I'm gonna ask them because that will give them a chance to engage. And that all went through about that fast. So that's the thing of being careful asking questions in an introduction. Because they don't, unless they really know where you're going, they'll all just answer.
And as you mentioned, be very careful of asking questions unless you're ready for any answer and what you're going to get from it.
Yes.
The other thing that was mentioned on Wednesday is all of us have been at a point where things might not be going quite as well as we would like, and we're starting to notice that some of the little ones are starting to play with each other or looking off in other directions. We're starting to lose that engagement. What are some creative things that we could do at that point to try and get them back if we feel like we're starting to lose them?
Pray. What did I say Wednesday night? Tell me what I said Wednesday night, no.
One of the things was coming down to their level if you're not already there.
Okay.
That can be extremely helpful. And you mentioned something else that was good, lowering your voice.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And
just simply,
jump.
yeah. That was the one, when I was telling the story with my teddy bear. Because it was a real personal story for me, I was having one of those moments like Tanya had this morning, where I wasn't sure that I was gonna be able to continue telling, and I just needed to slow down and let my heart and my brain get on the same page. And Kinsey reached up for the bear. And I walked over and handed her the teddy bear. And suddenly I realized, if I keep talking in this voice while handing her the bear, I'm basically going to be yelling in this baby's face. And so it just forced me to lower my voice. And it was amazing what happened to all the rest of the children. They got quieter, and they kind of turned their attention to over where I was with Kinsey, and in that minute, 30 seconds, it gave me that chance to say, okay, concretely, where am I gonna go from here?
The other thing that you mentioned, if you want to speak to this or not, was redirecting kinds of questions.
Redirecting behavior, or redirecting,
Key questions that can kind of redirect back to the point of the story. So, yeah, okay. The first two are perfectly good. I probably wrote it down differently than
Well, tell me
than
how I
you had
said
said
it.
it.
I
That's
knew,
what
no,
I
I
wrote
knew
down.
this was gonna be fun, because I didn't take notes Wednesday night.
Yeah. I'll think on that one for a
Okay.
minute too.
I mean, one thing I can just add for that is just simply asking, especially older kids, to restate what you just said. You know, so what was his name? How, you know? Robin?
Maybe.
I know a technique that they use in the primary lessons when you're telling a story is that you direct the children prior to the story. When you hear me say this, you do a hand motion.
Yeah.
And it also,
That's a fun one.
that is a fun one. It keeps them engaged, it keeps them listening, and, you know, it can be more than one hand. You can direct, okay, from this group, you're going to clap your hands when you hear this, or when you know, if you're talking about Queen Esther or something like that, and Haman, then they go boo, or something like that, and it engages the children in the story, that they're more attentive and they're trying to listen for their
Involved.
parts, and involves them.
And what I would suggest, doing that, where we've got this wider age spread, that's where you pull a couple of your bigger kids
Mhm.
in, and they're gonna lead the booers, and they're gonna lead the yayers, so that I, as the storyteller, don't have to now keep track of who is who, because having me in the middle of the story, I won't remember.
Well, that's also a technique that Bob Hartman uses as a storyteller. The repetitive building up stories, where he'll go back to the beginning and build on the story, and he'll have the same story, and he'll have the kids going, and the baby cried, "Ah," and he'll build on the story in that way and keeps the children engaged as well. It doesn't work for every story,
No,
of course,
Sure.
because there has to be, I would encourage individuality and creativity.
Mhm.
And yes, you want to set boundaries that we're all on the same page, but you also want to encourage creativity, so the person doesn't feel like, oh, I have to be like this.
No, we don't want a
When
formula.
you want to encourage people to be themselves as well, you know, and
Well, one of the conversations I had with Dr. Tom is Dr. Tom said, okay, but when I tell Eric B. Hare stories, they're all about somebody who was disobedient. And, you know, and we're talking about those principles of love and kindness, and how do I tell my Eric B. Hare stories? Well, but every story that has somebody who was disobedient. At least of every Eric B. Hare story I know, ends with grace.
Well, true, Jesus loves us even
Yeah.
though we're disobedient.
Exactly.
As a parent
And,
would.
well, and Eric B. Hare and some of, and Uncle Arthur
Mhm.
didn't always do the best job based on the time they were writing
Mm-hmm.
of adding those last couple of sentences
Mhm.
to those stories sometimes. Those stories tended to end a little bit with,
Mhm.
and so you better learn the lesson that you don't. And that's kind of where those stories ended.
Mhm.
And
Just add your.
that's it, that's just it. There's no reason we can't say, and so,
Mhm.
but aren't we glad we know that?
Jesus and Ricky.
Yeah.
And, are you also all right, with monologues or the skits? That I have experimented in the past with the girls doing Esther or Dr. Tom doing Moses or, you know, puppetry or, other skits that. or
Yeah,
short
I just
skits
think,
that
Robin,
we've
we
done.
need to be creative and flexible
Mhm.
into where we orient things. You know, the Sabbath before we went to Panama, because I needed the kids to see PowerPoint that was
Mhm.
fairly detailed,
Mhm.
and I wanted them to get the idea of building a block church,
Mhm.
I brought cinder blocks in, put them on the platform,
Mhm.
and I sat where Kyla plays her flute
Mhm.
and told the children's story
Mhm.
that direction. And I think that as long as the
Or they're
worship
seeing it in a
leadership
way
all
they can see
knows, and again, that's that lovely thing, of starting talking into that mic as the children immediately start coming. There's some things like that that we could do, that this week we're gonna ask boys and girls that you sit on the floor,
Mhm.
as in where I was today,
Mhm.
and the story's gonna be up here. Yeah,
I think what's cool about children's story is that you might expect, okay, I'm gonna get this certain reaction from the kids, they're gonna learn this little lesson, and something unexpected happens, but it makes it better. So like before we left for Panama, it was kind of, oh, instead of, it was pennies for Panama.
yes.
I think I said pennies for patience.
Yeah, well, that's because we all do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like, I had this like little pouch that I think,
Yes.
I think it was either Mrs. Stockton or Mrs.
Yeah.
Terry had gotten. It was just a little pouch from
Yeah.
Panama, and before I'd actually gone, and I had. It just so happened that I put like 50 little pennies in there, and I only had asked one person, oh, could I have a volunteer to? Because I was just kind of saying, okay, and I challenge you guys to, you know, ask your parents or whatever, bring some pennies for Panama, and I think they had little envelopes or
Yes.
something, just so they could keep it during the week and bring it to church. And I think I had asked like Maggie or someone just to come up and just kind of like demonstrate, okay, you're gonna put pennies in the church. Everyone started following her and get a penny,